Thank you for joining me for another quick hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Gabby Lubin, Hendry and Greg Burton. And I have a question, and I think this is a tough one. What is the opposite of fear? Greg, can you kick us off?
Yeah, in my life and people that I've seen around me, fear is debilitating. So I would say the opposite is enablement. If you're free from fear, you can go for whatever you want to go for. And without the fear, you can reach and not worry about what the consequences are. I think in sports, they have two different ways you can play. You can play for effect, or you can play through the shot. And then however the ball goes, whatever happens, it's up to the ball or whatever happens to win or lose. And so it all comes down to fear. If you have the yips, you swing at a golf ball and the ball is going to go over the green to the other side. But if you're stable and you believe in your shot, it goes. So I would say the opposite of fear is enablement.
Nice. I like that one. Okay.
It's interesting because I feel like I had a similar train of thought in a way, but I came to a different word, and I want to take you all through my train of thought. So immediately I thought the opposite of fear was love, because I think when we're talking about maybe it's just like a love-hate kind of dichotomy here, that's the first thing that came to mind. However, I don't think that when you love something, that means you don't in some ways fear it. I think they can sometimes go together in some form. So then I kind of went into this space of acceptance. If you accept something about yourself or the world, then you're feeling that you understand it in some way. There's not this like nervous feeling about it, but acceptance like still doesn't go far enough. And so I came to this word curiosity, because I think when you don't have fear in your life, or you don't feel fearful of something, essentially, like, I use a lot of stress science in my work. So if I'm not feeling stressed by this thing, then I actually might be curious about it. And I have the ability to kind of go and like seek more about it. So kind of similar to what I think you were saying, Greg, just like using a different word, but just like feeling of like freeness and possibility and an avenue of something.
Oh, I love that. That's so deep. Oh my goodness. Okay. Ian.
When you mentioned that, I had to think about what it is like and where it comes from. And there's many different instances. It's not just one thing or another, because in one way you're talking about sports and nervousness. Another thing, when you get into an emergency situation, most people wouldn't, when you process it, wouldn't jump into a burning building. But with adrenaline and no time frame to process something, there is no fear. You just go and do because you have to, because something has to be done to save certain people or do whatever the case is. So yeah, that is a challenging one. For me, I had to look at it in certain ways. I don't know if there's an actual word specific that can identify it, but I mean, removing a time constraint would, I guess, remove fear, if that makes sense.
When I thought about it, I was like, so my first thought was, okay, serenity. And I'm like, no, that's not right. And so I could not come up with a really good answer. I love the idea of enablement. It's certainly not bravery, because, bravery, stupidity, fear, those things kind of all go together. So it's not bravery, but the idea that I can't be afraid if I feel enabled. I can't be afraid if I feel curiosity. Or can I? Now I'm questioning my thought process. And you're right, being afraid has to have a timeline. Or does being afraid and not taking action have a timeline?
I think, and I mentioned this last time too, a bit with me being afraid of swimming, right, in the ocean because of the sharks. Well, when you educate yourself around the topic of that thing, it helps you to remove, at least minimize your anxiety or nervousness or fear to venture down that path, right? Again, though, I think there's certain circumstances or instances that may not work. And again, time is of one thing versus the education of another.
Yeah, because with knowledge comes reduction in fear, but does that make it the opposite? I don't know.
Well, I think it could go either way. I think with knowledge, you might actually be more fearful of something else because you've learned more about it. It's kind of like that you no longer are like ignorant. Like when I think about when I started my business, I didn't know what to be afraid of because I had no experience in business. So I just did it. But if I had known more, that would have been a very different story.
True. Greg, what are you thinking now?
I can relate to that. I think that the knowledge can actually increase your fear. There was one time when I was a kid, I was on a little boat and I wanted to jump into the water. So I did, and I jumped right into a big jellyfish.
Oh no.
And had I known that the jellyfish was there, I would not have jumped, obviously. And I would have been fearful of jumping in the water. But if I had that knowledge, I would not have done it. So it can definitely work that way. And certainly, if I think about fires, like the worst way I could possibly imagine dying. So for me, I could never be a firefighter, but I give those guys the most credit I could possibly give anybody to conquer that fear and go into a burning building. That's more than I got. That's for sure.
Because I wonder, when we talk about fear, whether it's in the business sense or any other, sharks, whatever, if we think about the opposite of it, will it help us overcome it? Or does it just give us a thought experiment that ends up in a quandary?
Greg was just touching on it, made me realize something then about ignorance. If you don't know anything about it, there's nothing to be afraid of.
This is bliss, right?
Yeah. If you don't know it's going to burn you, you put your hand in it. Now you know it's going to burn you because you just stuck your hand in that fire. But otherwise, you have no clue.
Yes. And I think, like, when I think of politics, oftentimes ignorance can kind of lead into this space of fear. We just aren't educated about certain topics, so we become fearful and thus don't like them. Sounds like there's no perfect answer here.
And that's the thing with Quick Hits, is a lot of times there aren't perfect answers. And that's what makes these conversations interesting, is that we have, in the English language anyway, we have this idea of fear, but we don't have something that really offsets it very well. And so often as business owners or clients I work with, we're talking about fear. How do I get through fear? How do I go around fear? How do I overcome my fear? But if we don't know what the other side of it is, like what's better, what's the opposite, what makes it work?
I think we spend a lot of time thinking about this negative space oftentimes as well. And not to be toxic positivity necessarily, but we forget that if we focus on the other side of the spectrum and talk about what good is out there, that totally changes the way that we're viewing our world, the self-talk that we have. And so I wonder if we went back and even redid this conversation and focused less on the topic of fear, but more on the topic of what that opposite feeling is, I bet it would have been a completely different conversation.
If we could figure out what the opposite feeling is. It's hard that's the challenge, is how do you have a conversation about something that is so nebulous as being the opposite of fear?
Don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either, but I'm really intrigued by this idea, because I feel like if we can even individually identify what does it mean for me to be the opposite of fear, it makes it a lot easier to figure out, how do I move through it? What does it look like? How do I know when I'm not feeling fear, I'm feeling excited, or I'm, and maybe then we can tell the difference between fear, which is your subconscious saying, hey, don't do that, that's stupid, and fear with your subconscious saying, I'm afraid, I don't know how to do that, let's not try. Because I think those are two different types of fear too.
I mean, at that point, you're talking about the difference of confidence and insecurity, really, right?
Potentially, I have pushed through fear that I thought was insecurity, and it was actually my subconscious saying, don't do that. And it's cost me thousands, tens of thousands of dollars.
You gotta trust your gut. Definitely. But I think also that's really, I totally believe in trusting the process. And that's what I find. I can overcome hurt, I can overcome fear, I can overcome the dead spot where you can't see the other end. And for me, it's just, all right, I know if I do this, I do this, do this, do this. Like for getting in shape, for example, one time I was 15 pounds heavier, and I just had to say, I'm going to go trust the process and eat fewer calories than I burn every day. And just keep doing that, cut out the starches and keep going that. And even when a day I didn't lose weight, or I gained weight a little bit, I still had my goal, and I knew that the process worked. And I think that's, if you do that with everything, cut things down to little bites, as they say.
So maybe the opposite of fear might have something to do with having a process too.
Exactly.
So I love the idea that we came up with, that it might have something to do with love. It might have something to do with being enabled, acceptance, curiosity, recognizing the time frame. I love all of these ideas, and I love so much that there is no right answer, because that's what makes Quick Hits fun. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me, and I look forward to speaking to each of you again really soon.